Are you ready to take your business to the next level? Every day there are countless books and articles that are published offering the key on how to make your business a success. It's easy to feel overwhelmed trying to keep up and run your business. That's why Deb Creer created the Business Power Hour. Keep up on the latest trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. Let the Business Power Hour do the heavy work for you.
Good morning. Good morning. I am Deb Creer, and I am passionate about giving professionals the tools that they need to make themselves and their businesses as successful as possible. And I am so excited today because we're going to be speaking with an expert on things that are in our head, things that might not be in our head, all of those things that make life challenging, whether we are dealing with employees, our family, our clients, all of these various things. It's these things that, they get between our ears and they mess things up. And so please join me in welcoming Dr. Debra Dupree to our program today. Welcome, Dr. Debra. How are you doing?
Well, thank you so much, Deb. I'm honored to be here and I'm doing great.
Perfect. I love it. Well, as I mentioned, I'm going to, I am so excited about having you on the program. And so let me tell people just a little bit about you, and then we'll go from there. So Dr. Debra Dupree is known as the Mindset Doc. She transforms challenging confrontations into learning conversations, taking the sting out of conflict. She saw her own family-owned business embroiled in differences, leading to dashed dreams, damaged relationships, and broken hearts. She turned these early experiences into a lifeline for smart people who fear conflict by bringing in the brain science behind blowups and emotional reactions. Everyone has a family and everyone needs to work, but life doesn't always feel psychologically safe. Dr. D works with families and organizations to build a climate of courage and curiosity to set the tone for meaningful exchanges to learn, listen, and grow to stop the cycle of conflict. Dr. Debra is a dispute resolution specialist, conflict leadership coach, international trainer, and a keynote speaker. She hosts the podcast Decoding the Conflict Mindset to bring thought leaders to her community worldwide to gain insight when emotions run high. So again, Dr. Debra, welcome.
Thank you again, Deb. I really appreciate it. And I'm delighted to be speaking to your community worldwide.
Perfect. I love it. Kind of love these worldwide communities, and that's the cool thing about technology, right? But it's also made life more difficult for us. And so, we might talk about that a little bit when we get into this. But, how did you get into this? Because it is a challenging career choice in many ways. And so tell us about how it is that you discovered that this really is your passion in life.
Well, that's always an interesting story because we all have a story. Mm-hmm. Basically, growing up, as you've already mentioned in my intro, I could see people just really struggling. Mm-hmm. And when I was in high school and took my first psychology class, it was like, oh my goodness, people actually know about
That's what's stuff. Going on. Mm-hmm.
And I have to admit, I floundered a bit in college trying to figure out exactly what I wanted to study. Mm-hmm. But I kept going back to the psychology of people. Mm-hmm. And that has become my pathway from my undergrad to my graduate to my doctorate degree, and just continuing to advance in my study and understanding of human dynamics and what makes people tick, how to shift the direction of confrontations into conversations. And that's when I went back for my doctorate degree, actually less than 10 years ago, now we know so much about the neuroscience of the brain. It's not only fascinating, but people love to learn about what do we know now that we didn't know before.
Right. Well, you mentioned the brain, and I love that this is what you have studied, because I think so many times it's when we have conflicts, it's not that you don't like that person or you don't like that boss or you disagree with them. So many times it's based on things that happened years ago. And, maybe not even with that person, right? And so talk to us a little bit more about how it is that especially in a business situation, you can help people kind of root out those base causes of some of these conflicts?
One of the things I realized, Deb, is that when people are in conflict, they tend to attack and be attacked, tend to take it very personally.
Right.
And the reality is that what's really going on is we want to separate the person from the problem, the person from the behavior. It's oftentimes behaviors that trigger us into a reaction. And so that's one of the key things, is that, not, as you already said, it's not that we don't like somebody. We can still get into conflict even when we love somebody. But if we can distinguish the behaviors that are causing us angst, that are not sitting well with us, then we can still hold our love for that person or our liking of that person, and then work together about the change in behavior. And I like to say it takes two to tango, but only one to change the direction of the dance. And so if we take ownership for ourselves and again, do a little bit of a deep dive into, well, who am I? What's my story? What kinds of behaviors did I encounter from my childhood that are still with me today? Because those kinds of emotional memories are actually embedded in our brain and will tend to show up in our adult lives. And so, for example, let's say, I think a lot of people can resonate with this, a mom or a dad that was highly critical. And so we sort of got into that self-doubt and shame mode, and perhaps retreated and not deal with conflict very well, or not know how to process those emotions. And now we're in the workplace and we have a boss that tends to be critical. And so it's just like sending you way back to your childhood, and here I go all over again. And a lot of people, quite frankly, are unaware of those connections and how they show up. And so when I'm working with people, frequently I'm called in to work with teams of people. And so that's some coaching to a manager or a leader, but also some one-on-one with each of the team members to sort of, dive deeper, find a little bit more about them. And, what do they excel at in their adult communication, and where are they challenged? Those are opportunities then where we can make a difference in how they show up, how they communicate, providing some structure, actually a roadmap, and giving them practice.
Right. And oh my gosh, this is so much fun. You mentioned it takes two to tango. You've got, as you said, the dynamic. So we'll do boss and employee. The boss might be meaning well, doesn't even recognize that how they say something might be coming across as conflict, as opposed to a gentle suggestion. All of these things. So let's start with that. How do you work with that person to get them to kind of switch their tone and how they say things?
It's taking that deeper dive with them too, in terms of asking them, what do you feel good about? What do you feel that you do well as a manager? Where do you have challenges? And is it with certain kinds of people? Now we can start breaking it down into behaviors. And what is it about this behavior that triggers you? What is your mindset as you approach this person? Because again, bosses are people too, and so they have their childhood stories as well. And sometimes we're not even aware that we show up in ways that are very similar to maybe how mom or dad or grandpa showed up. And so as a leader, as a boss, we may be showing up in ways that replicate those early behaviors. And so, again, helping people become aware of what works well for them, what doesn't work so well for them, and where do they want to improve. Now, one of the things that I do, I think with every client I have and have for about 20 years, is I have put together what I call the 3D formula to mindset shift. And so these are what I call quickie little assessments, because there are more robust assessments out there, but at least a way of getting started and helping people understand their dynamics as well as the dynamics of others. And so the first one is emotional intelligence. How self-aware are you? And then how well do you manage yourself? How aware of others are you? And then how do you manage that relationship? So that's the foundation. Then I go into communication styles. Again, I have a quickie version, but the DISC is the version that I tend to use organizationally. particularly for the leader, because it's so powerful in the management version about not only do they learn about themselves, but then they learn how to manage people from the different communications. It's just rich with information and guidance. And then I actually take people into the 5 conflict management styles, founded by Thomas Kilmann. And there's a lot of correlation between communication styles and conflict management styles, but then there are some differences. And so, again, I work with people about the advantages of this style, the disadvantages of this style, when to use, how to use, things like that. So again, I try to take it very behavioral, so that people can work on these behavioral changes in terms of how they show up and influence others, rather than feeling that they're just a chocolate mess when it comes to being a manager, And so trying to break it down, chunk it down is what I like to call it.
Right. And I think one of the problems, and I've talked about this on the program with other guests before, is someone is promoted or you start a business, so you're in charge. And you're promoted based on certain skill sets. So you might be good at marketing, you might be good at accounting, all of those various things. But very rarely are you actually given training and assistance on how to deal with people. And I think that's then where the problems come in, is we're not equipped to be able to do that.
Absolutely. In fact, there's a statistic I'll share from the Ken Blanchard Institute, the 1 Minute Manager. And what they found in their surveys with up and coming managers is that it was oftentimes a good 6 to 10 years before a new supervisor would actually get the training necessary to effectively lead people. And like you're so right, is that a lot of people get promoted because of their technical skills. But what we're learning, and again, the post-pandemic era, is people are looking for something different in their workplace as well as in their leadership. And so it's a shift from what I call evidence-based, how good am I, how smart am I, my degrees, my years of experience, and so forth, to connection-based. And so it's really the art of communication, not just talking is telling, but really connecting by being aware of others' emotions, your own emotions, and then the impact and influence you have on others as well. And being able to shift that to create a positive outcome, an energetic outcome that people are motivated to move forward, rather than, again, that more critical or what's wrong with you kind of approach that I think a lot of management models really focus on that before. So we're seeing a huge shift in this direction.
Yeah, because the what's wrong with you, no matter how they word it, comes across as you're stupid. I mean, right? It's but as you were talking, I was also thinking, to me, one of the hardest things was when I was promoted and everybody had been my friend. The co-workers were my friends. Now, all of a sudden, I was their boss. And, and you mentioned a family business. I mean, how do you deal with those dynamics when someone, they're in a different role? Because I still wanted to go out for Friday happy hour and hear about my coworkers' kids and what they were doing on the weekends. But I also needed to tell them, this is your deadline. You have to meet this deadline. All of those various things. So how do you deal with it when those roles change?
That's a great question, because that is such a common challenge for people who promote from within. Now their coworkers are their subordinates. And so the dynamic is a big shift, and it's one that's difficult to manage unless you do some study about it. And so one of the things that I encourage people to do when they're promoting from within, and now that same dynamic of your friends are now your subordinates, is I encourage people to have the conversation earlier rather than later. It's like the elephant in the room. We know it's going to change the dynamics. We just may not know exactly how. And so I encourage, new supervisors or managers like that who have moved up within, is let's take time to have a conversation, and let's talk about roles and responsibilities. Let's talk about communication lines. Let's talk about, the sort of the boundaries. We're friends, but in the workplace, we also have to have some boundaries regarding our respective roles. And the earlier you have that conversation, now people don't tend not to be so fearful of what could happen, and also not lead to isolation, particularly for the supervisor or manager.
Right. And I did discover that I still wanted to be their friends. And I really couldn't. It was, I mean, you could, but you couldn't. I mean, there was, and so I had an example. I ran a communications department, and I traveled quite a bit. And one of the things that I did, I don't know why I did this, I just did this. I would bring the people I worked with, and I guess other people had done it for me. And so I thought, oh, well, this was fun. So I'd bring them back little gifts. Now, I never spent more than $5-10, and just all of these little things. And just, kind of like how when you're a parent and you go somewhere and you bring back a little gift for your child. And, had to unfortunately lay one of my employees off. And she did not take it well, and it was unfortunately one of those where she was highly skilled. She knew what she was doing. We had budget cuts. She was the last one hired. But I certainly couldn't say, well, it's not my fault. I mean, I knew better than that. But, and things went well. We had a going away lunch for her, all sorts of things. And then after she left, I discovered in my trash can, so she had to deliberately come and do this, were all of the little gifts that I had given her. And of course, I was hurt. I was angry because, I mean, part of me thought, now just how petty could you be? I mean, she could have just thrown them away. I mean, but to deliberately come in where she knew I would see them. And then, of course, what happens is I get phone calls wanting me to give a referral for her. And and I was at that point still in the stupid petty stage. And so all I did was what the company line was. She was employed on this date. Her last day was this date, and her final salary was this. And that basically was what all we were told to do. But then, of course, you got the question. So I'm understanding from your tone that maybe, and so she actually had the courage, and I'm using that word deliberately. She had the courage to call me and say, what gives? And so she and I had a very good chat, and she apologized for doing that. And then I said, okay, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to give you my cell phone number, and they can call that number so that I am able to speak more freely. And I said, and I will give you a very good recommendation. But I mean, it was just kind of one of those things where, we get caught up in those petty, those hurt feeling things. And it can cause so many conflicts, whether they're, still with the company, the family, the whatever or not. So how in the heck do you get past those?
That's an excellent example. Thank you so much for sharing. Oh, I
did. It hurt my feelings really bad. Yeah. I mean, I was like, oh.
Yeah. Well, and I think, and this is where a lot of times people don't speak up. So I really, commend her for her courage, as well as her curiosity. Those are two words I like to use interchangeably. It takes courage to be curious. And so that's what you did. But also you need curiosity to be courageous. So, that's the thing is that, when I'm working with people is to explore them, what kinds of things tend to trigger you? We all have our hot buttons, shall we say. And that's actually part of one of my larger assessments I do with people around conflict. And, to recognize, we have both constructive and destructive behaviors.
Right.
And a lot of times we don't realize how passively aggressive those destructive behaviors are, the jab, the dig.
Yeah, the little
right. And so it's not what you say, it's how you say it. That's where tone comes up so tremendously. And I emphasize then, what impact do you have on others? Are you coming across in a way that others actually want to communicate with you, want to work with you, want to follow what you're asking them to do? And how do you influence them? And so this is where I know it sounds challenging to many leaders, but in today's world, it really does become imperative that leaders take the time to get to know each of their employees to some level. Not their deep, dark story or their childhood story unfolding, but to know just who is this person? Because one size does not fit all.
Mm-hmm.
And
Right.
that's when it comes to leadership. You can have a general style, but then the people who feel highly motivated and feel good about your leadership are those who know that you know something about them personally.
Right.
And again, it doesn't have to go into the deep, closet of the background, but instead to, well, hi, Jack, and how's your child, and or something like that. And, this notion is actually very old. It goes back to the 80s, but management by walking around.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah. And again, people really value that. And that hasn't changed. That has not changed in today's world. And with that, too, is, you may not feel like you always appreciate the other person. You may not really want to acknowledge where people are coming, but the power of a simple thank you, thank you for sharing what you did. I can imagine that must have been hard. So now you're showing some awareness of the other person. And Gallup actually did a study. This goes back about 20 years, but it hasn't changed. They basically did a survey. Gallup studies are huge. And what are the 3 top things that are most important to employees? And the first one was actually being called by their name and the name that they wanted to be called by.
Yeah.
Yeah. And
yeah,
so
somebody see, you're a Debra and I'm a Debra, but I don't go by Debra. And so I know somebody doesn't know me if they call me Debra. If they call me Deb, then now if they call me Debbie, I know they've known me since I was like 2 years old.
I'm sort of the same way. Called Debbie growing up, and sometimes didn't have a choice because there were 5 Debras in my first grade class. Yes. So it's a very popular name back in my age. But they call by their name and the name they prefer. And caution people about slipping into nicknames because they can feel harmful.
Right.
And I'll give you a quick example on that, and then I'll go back to the other 2 things. I used to be involved with a human resource company out of Miami, and we would do training for very large organizations that were oftentimes under a decree from the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission for diversity training. So situations where claims have been filed for discrimination, harassment, hostile workplace, and things like that. And so it was a powerful program. I really loved it. And one of our clientele was the Longshore and Harbor Workers Union. And so, tended to be male dominated,
a little rough around the edges, shall we say.
Yeah, you said it, I didn't. So
wonderful people, but
yeah. And so we were talking about nicknames, and it was pretty amazing because there was one gentleman, there's always somebody in the classroom, 1 or 2 people who are very quiet, sit towards the back, don't engage, even though we have a lot of group activities that are very fun and interactive. But he finally got enough courage. It was about 2:30 in the afternoon, and we'd been together all day. And I guess we sort of threw out more of a rhetorical question, but he raised his hand, and so it was like, okay, share with us what's going on. And he said, we've been talking about nicknames all day, and I've never said anything to any of my coworkers here, but I don't like being called tiny. Because
I'm assuming he was a large man.
Yeah, you can see I'm nothing but tiny. And so every time somebody calls me tiny, I'm reminded how heavy I am. And it doesn't make me feel good. I feel motivated. I don't want to talk to you. And that was just a real wake-up call for his colleagues. And
I bet and I hope they felt bad. I mean, I don't want them to feel bad, but because they'd never considered it, I'm sure they did feel bad.
Yes. Yeah. And so, that's why it's so important that, you refer to people by their name, and people want to be called their name. That actually sort of came out from the days of when a lot of organizations would refer to employees by their number. And so
I know. Oh, yeah.
Yeah. And so, but the value of being called the appropriate name is still there. The other thing is simply to be, told thank you. Thank you for being here. Thank you for what you did. And out of that, I came up with an acronym called PEAK. Acknowledge people for their presence. Just thank you for being here today. Thank you for being on time. And then E, acknowledge people for their effort or their energy. You just have positive energy, and I so appreciate that. I feel myself pick up when I'm around you. A is for acknowledge people for their accomplishments or achievements or attitude. Attitude is another one. And then C, there's a couple things too, is acknowledge people for their challenges, their concerns, and so forth. And so it's just an easy way to acknowledge people. And it's not, we're not talking about appreciation or agreeing with people. We're simply acknowledging where they're coming from and what you notice about them. And so it's another powerful way of making connections.
Right. Yeah, I've shared this on the program before. When I was at this large company, my CEO calls me in and he says, we need to redo everybody's name badges. Okay. I mean, I was like, whatever. And he said, I want the first name, and you said what you wanted. So like mine said Deb. He said, I want it big enough that when I'm 6 feet away, I can read it. And at that point, now I'm in the communication department, I'm running the communication, but I was like, okay, whatever. I mean, he told me to do it. And so we did. And I forget why we told everybody they needed new badges. Nobody cared, but they all got new badges. But it was incredible to hear people say, I passed Steve in the hall and he called me by name. And that was exactly what he was doing. And it was just something so simple as that, because, there was no way he was going to remember all those names. I mean, we had several hundred employees and but yeah, just that little change. And so I love it when I go somewhere to a meeting or something and somebody has a name badge on and I can read their name, because names are a challenge to me. They've always been a challenge to me. Yours I will remember because it's the same as my name. But but other people, I can meet them 20 times and still not get their name right. So I love name tags. And it's just kind of one of those things. But you're right. We love hearing our own name. And it's so simple just to say, hey, Deborah, how are you doing today? I mean, things like that just make a big difference to folks, especially if there's a little something going bad in their life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And again, it's a way of making a connection. And people, we hear a lot about employee engagement today and how people, in spite of our increasing access to technology, still feel so alone and isolated. And that's why another thing, sort of with what you're saying, I was working with a very large hotel, which is international. And, basically I got called in though, because their annual employee survey came up pretty poorly. And it had them in the very lowest quadrant of all hotels throughout the world.
Yikes.
And so leadership was like, oh my goodness, what are we going to do? And so, I've incorporated a lot of what we're talking about today in my training and so forth. And I actually worked one-on-one with each of the what they call them division heads, and then some of the sub-unit managers, to really try to make a change. So that's what the survey really targeted, was pretty critical of management at every level. And so I was working with one division head, and he said to me, Deborah, I just don't get it. He goes, I think I'm a very nice, affable kind of person. I've got a good sense of humor. I've actually worked my way up from the very bottom rung. I know all the jobs of the people that I now manage, and I have the largest department in the entire hotel. And he said, but my department also has the highest rate of complaints. And they don't speak up in meetings, and gave me some other examples. And so I took the opportunity to observe him as he was coming into the hotel for a day of work. And, he wasn't a real big man, but he was, firm and had dark hair, dark eyebrows, dark lashes. And so, there's a lot of darkness to his face, shall we say.
Right. Kind of imposing.
Yeah. And so, and he was already preoccupied with what he had to deal with that today. So he would walk down the hallway and wouldn't even acknowledge people that worked for him. Yeah. And so I said, well, I think I've observed something that's actually pretty simple. And so I want you to try this for the next few days. And so it's say, hello, hi, good morning, and, much as possible, use their name. And so in doing follow-up with him, it was about 30 days later, and he goes, Deborah, I cannot believe it. I cannot believe what a change in atmosphere simply saying good morning to people in the morning does. Because our meetings are so much better. People actually walk in my open door because I have an open door policy when they didn't before. And we just really changed how we're doing things. And I can't believe it started with me being friendly as soon as I walked in the door and acknowledging people and saying good morning.
Right.
And so that's another thing then, is that particularly when it comes to conflict, because if we haven't made that connection in the morning and all I see is this sour face and oh, what's going on? And did I do something wrong?
Right. You're going to keep your distance.
Exactly. You're going to keep your distance. And if a conflict does come up, oh, I'm not going to go talk to that person.
Right.
I don't know. Bite my head off. And so when I'm working with groups of people, I'll acknowledge, this strategy, tell my little story, and say, after you've had a connection, are you more likely to go to that person later on when something's not going well and you need some help? Yeah, yeah. And so that's one of the things when I do training, or if I'm doing a mediation or a presentation, I always do something that will engage the people with each other.
Right.
And it's just amazing. You can just see that people relaxing and their shoulders relaxed and they're smiling and they just had a fun time connecting over 2 or 3 minutes,
Right.
Yeah. And so that's a tip that I pass on to everybody, is to do your part in saying good morning when you start your day.
Right. And even if you don't call them by name, just the fact that you looked at them, and so look at them, don't hi, be, and acknowledge their presence. And I think maybe that's it. We all want to be acknowledged, and so, just saying hi, good morning is better than grumpa, 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 right?
Absolutely. Because, when I mentioned, people are feeling very isolated today, because when we don't acknowledge people, even in those, brief passings, people feel like they're invisible, and that they don't matter. They may feel significant. And instead, particularly we as leaders, but as coworkers too, we want to do things that help keep people up,
right.
And keep their energy, keep their motivation up. Because when people are distracted or disoriented because of, maybe how they've been treated by others, that's when we do have misunderstandings and inefficiencies. We make mistakes because we're not fully present. We're distracted.
Right. And that all kind of leads us to the bigger question of, are we talking to people or are we communicating? And there's going to be so many people that go, well, it's the same thing. Yeah. No, it's not. And so communicate with us about, chat with us about, what is the difference between talking and communicating?
It's interesting because there are several words. I'm sure we could find lots more words that sound synonymous, but they're not really. So talking and communicating is one of those. And yet look at how much we use the word talk, but
right.
And I'll just share with you real quickly before I go into that distinction, is that listening and hearing are also two words that are often considered synonymous. But hearing is the audible sound. Listening is actually where we give meaning.
Right. We absorb it.
Yes. And then seeing and looking, as well, look over there. Okay, I am, but what am I seeing? What am I supposed to be seeing? And so it's important to, use our language wisely. And so going back to talking and communicating, talking is really about telling. It's the verbal content of what you or I want to say. It's more of the delivery of information. Communicating, though, is really an exchange, not only of content, but also exploring how are you impacted, being aware of others' emotions or feelings or the impact. I referenced the EEOC earlier, and so the EEOC talks about, it doesn't matter what you intended to do, it's the impact of your behavior on others, which is what we have to look at in terms of discrimination, retaliation, harassment, and things like that. And so be aware of the impact you have on others. And again, maybe make adjustments in our words that we use, our tone. I like to share, 55% of how we communicate is through our behavior, our facial expressions, particularly the eyes. You tell a lot if you know how to read the nonverbal cues. And then 38% is through how we sound, our tone, our volume, or inflection. And again, we convey hugely, which is manipulating those two parts of it, our body language and then how we sound. That leaves only 7% left to the words. And that doesn't mean words are not important. Words do matter. And so that's why I said, choose your words wisely. Make sure that you're using words that convey what you want to convey. And so communication, we can think about it like an umbrella. The communication is that big umbrella, and talking is a subset of that umbrella.
Right. Yeah. And I asked earlier, if you're the boss and you've got some issues, what about if you're the employee or the volunteer or even the child, and you want to, you've got these issues, you've got somebody who might be bullying you, who might be talking down to you, who might be doing all of those things. And I think, of course, that the initial, and probably in most cases, the reaction is, we're just not going to do anything. Nope, we're not going to make the situation worse. We're not going to, I don't want to get yelled at more, right? All of these things. But if you are that second person, what are things that you can do to try to improve this situation?
Again, a good question. I'm coaching people a lot about this all the time, and helping employees develop a mindset and courage and curiosity to be able to speak up to someone who's treated them poorly. One of the things that I've learned over the years, specializing not only in the psychology of human dynamics, but also the conflict, that people experience, and helping parties navigate through conflict through mediation, is that it's really about learning to disengage from the heat of the moment. Trying to address it in that moment is more likely to see things escalate.
Right.
And why do I say that? So the person who may be treating you poorly, bullying you, or saying some snide remark, some jab or poke or whatever, that's an indication that, one, either they're not emotionally aware of how they're impacting people, back to emotional intelligence,
or they don't care.
or they don't care. But what I've learned, I get that a lot. Well, they don't care how they treat you. Well,
I think most of the time, though, they do, and it's a habit.
Right, it's a habit, and when they're in that moment, something emotional is going on for them too.
Right.
So that's why I help people disengage from the heat of the moment, but to re-engage in a calmer moment. So we go back to the brain science centers, that when we get triggered, we can feel our head going, and the brain chemicals are going on and neurological firing is going on. So we're actually not able to function in our prefrontal cortex, our executive brain. We have all this other stuff going on in the limbic brain. But if we learn to disengage from the heat of the moment, then physiologically, it can actually take our brains and our bodies up to 24 to 72 hours for our physiology to settle back down from that triggering state. And so when I'm working with people from a conflict management perspective, in improving their communication skills, I usually recommend at first, step away from the heat of the moment, but commit to coming back in a calmer moment. And so at first, to practice, 24 to 48 hours, because then you're not so hot that you'll get re-triggered, but you're also getting the other person in a hot moment. And so that's a way of slowing things down, and then coming back with, I've developed a 2-part script to guide people in terms of how to approach somebody when something adverse has happened, and how to communicate about that by focusing on the behavior. And say, Deb, I'd like to talk about that encounter we had yesterday. I have to admit, it's really been on my mind, and I'm just not feeling good about it. And our working relationship is very important to me, and so I really want to have a good working relationship with you as my supervisor. Could we take 10, 15 minutes at a later time to talk about that? I'd like to hear where you're coming from. I'd like to share with you how I was impacted, because I own that some of this may be my own stuff. But if we want a good working relationship, this isn't working for me.
Right.
So that's sort of how
it would be pretty hard for me to say no.
Exactly. Yeah.
I might say not right now.
Not right now.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I came up with that 2-part deal because so many times I always like to say, Managers, supervisors, leaders, how many of you have a line item in your job description that talks about managing conflict with people? And
That's the and
no.
other duties as assigned,
Yeah,
right?
there you go. There you go. Yeah, yeah. Or the other thing is that how many of you have a line item in your budget that has money earmarked for dealing with conflict? Because the studies show that, in the average company of almost any size, a manager is going to deal with employee conflict a good 30% of their day.
Right.
And yet it's not built in. It's not built in anymore. And in bigger corporations like the Fortune 500, it even jumps to 50%. And so it's like, one, people complain then is that, well, if I have an open door policy and people use it, then I end up having all my time absorbed by this employee, the need. It's like, well, that's got to be curbed because no wonder you're not getting your other work done. And that's not necessarily what the other person really needs, and so using the two-part strategies that, like you said, I'd love to talk to you, not right now. Then that's okay. Let's set a time for later when we're both prepared for this.
Right.
I'm sure you have other things to do. I do too. And then you set a time. Now you have time to,
and that's the important thing. You have to deal with it.
Yes. Yeah, you do have to deal with it. Walking away indefinitely is no solution. Yeah. So that's where I also work a lot with the communication styles, because some people are naturally conflict avoidant and would like to never deal with it if they don't have to. Unfortunately, those people who don't resolve conflict oftentimes have other stress issues and health issues because they are absorbing the conflict. And then others are too quick to want to jump into conflict right now, right here, do it now. It's like, no, and so working with that, the timing, the pacing, all of that comes into play in some of my strategies.
Right. Well, one of the things that we've mentioned is the fact that, post-COVID, during COVID and then post-COVID, I mean, we were all of a sudden thrown into this situation where nobody was prepared for it, right? Friday you were at work, Monday you weren't. And maybe on Thursday you were going, something's not, maybe I should take my stuff home with me on Friday. But but how difficult is it now that we're not in the offices? Because it seems like there'd be less conflict, but I think what I'm hearing from people is that there's more because there's just things that are missing. So how do we deal with this hybrid or whatever situation it is that we've got now?
Yes, it's interesting, how we can actually have more conflict when we're not directly with people. But it gets back to communication. So one of the strategies that I have been drawing upon for quite a few years now actually comes out of the work of course, now all of a sudden I'm blanking on his name.
Somebody important.
Yeah, and he's a very he wrote Patrick Lencioni, there we go.
Okay.
I'm pretty sure that's it. He wrote a book called Death by Meetings. And so most people will laugh and go, oh yeah, we have way too many meetings, But he says, actually, we don't have enough of the right kind of meetings.
Right.
And he outlines then different types of meetings of different durations for specific goals and objectives. And so one of the things that I have found very, very helpful is for managers and supervisors to initiate a daily check-in. And, you can do it at the end of the day or at the beginning of the day. I prefer doing it at the beginning of the day. It doesn't matter if you're on site or not. It's just everybody just get on.
Right.
And
remind everybody you exist kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. But it's about connection. And so just want to check in with everybody, here's what's hot today. Here's what's not. Things have shifted from when we talked yesterday. Who has any emergency or urgent needs that might need some help? We can reallocate resources to assist here and there. And so again, it's a way of people feeling connected. They feel heard. They feel like you got their back. And I encourage people, don't do it more than 10, 15 minutes. 30 would be way too much.
And you don't want it to be a bitch session.
Exactly. It's a quick connect, touch base. And again, you're there to support and redirect as needed. And it's great today. Wonderful. We'll see you tomorrow. Patrick says do it every day. I don't know that that's necessary, but maybe 2-3 times a week. Yeah. And again, that's a really, really great way. I mean, again, when I have worked with teams and managers, I follow up and say, what's working for you, what's not. And that daily connection, or almost daily connection, is one of the most powerful tools that I got so much out of that. People love it.
I was talking with somebody who they had to instigate a policy where they said, we're going to do this and we're going to have our meetings and, whatever, we're all online now. Your camera must be on.
Yeah.
And, and I'm one of these, I'm like, but I'm sitting here eating. But you lose so much when your camera is off, because it is very easy, first of all, to not be paying attention at all. Right. And if you go, every once in a while, they think, okay, you're there and you're interested, but so you've got that accountability because you are able to see them. And you can also, if you're very good at this and you can also start picking up on things. Are they a little more unkempt than usual? Is their background, now it's funny, we've got all these different backgrounds that people have, but if say your background is just cluttered and it wasn't before, and granted, you're only seeing people from chest level up, but you can still pick up on some of their body language. So I think as much as we kind of go, I don't want my camera on, I think it is a good thing, and I really like it when I'm participating in a meeting if people have their cameras on. I've discovered if they don't, and even if they have a picture there, they don't exist to me. They're just not even there. And so as much as we're like, I have to have my camera on, which means I can't sit here in my scrunchy t-shirt and all of these various things. Well, you know what, folks, this is a t-shirt that I put a scarf on. And so but I think it is important from the communications perspective to have the cameras on.
Absolutely. I've gotten I so enjoy being able to see people like this. And if you know how to read the nonverbal cues, you can pick up so much. In fact, I do a lot of work with mediators on how to manage the emotional climate more effectively. And I said, actually mediations have been very successul online because we're not sitting in the same room with this other person.
It kind of diffuses things a bit.
It does. Yeah. We're not in the heat. We feel the heat with somebody when they're angry with us, right? And so that actually diffuses that, and people are able to engage much more effectively in that exchange of information. Yeah. And so, and I know I did a mediation last week where it got a little, well, I guess the head person was unable to get from his site over to the main site fast enough. He didn't want to delay it. So he could participate by telephone. And so he wasn't on camera. We were all there. And so it was challenging. And I needed to
a voice pipes up and you're like, where'd that come from?
Well, as a mediator and to facilitate that, I need to be mindful of how are people showing up, and that I do my job to facilitate and make sure I'm checking in with them.
Right.
And I just want to make sure that you heard that.
Still clearly. There, Bob?
Yeah, exactly. But I have to admit, I like the visual so much. I'm not, even talking on the phone, just the phone is not enjoyable these days than just actually getting on the camera with one another.
Right.
But yeah, having that connection is very important. And again, you can read a lot about body language and what's going on. And so I know when the pandemic first hit and people were going, oh, good, I get to wear my sweats all day and working and I don't need to take a shower. I don't need to do my hair or whatever. And I remember doing a Facebook live stream and say, no. It's very important that we set our mindset in the morning to be ready for work.
Right. Yes. You are working, so you should be quasi prepared for it.
Yeah. No, I may have blue jeans on the bottom, but I'm always dressed, from the top. And so that, because again, our visually, how we show up does impact other people. And then choose that if people are unkempt or disheveled or whatever, it could be an indication that maybe they are feeling isolated and maybe experiencing some mental health concerns. And so it's a way of managers checking in and having those one-on-ones and taking time to check in with people, particularly now that we have the hybrid.
Right. And people are looking at what we have around us. And I just find that funny because I had a Zoom consultant, right? But we look at the backgrounds, we look at what's there. If they've got books, we're looking to see, what are they reading? What are they reading? And I remember I was talking with a friend of mine who had, when COVID first started, she had absolutely no room to set up a private office. And so her desk was in her bedroom. Now, she said it was always very neat and very tidy. And she said, but one time somebody said, "Where'd you buy that quilt?" And she thought, and she said they were not meaning it bad. They really wanted to buy the quilt. I mean, they were just,
they liked
it. She immediately thought, this is unprofessional of me. And so she figured out a different way. She got a screen, and that was just the easiest way to do it. So she was still in the same spot. She just, had a screen behind her. And so I think that's the other thing is, we need to do that. And like, I mentioned, I had a Zoom consultant. She had me take down things, but I just had sayings and things. Now they were professional. I mean, that nobody was going to go, "Oh my God, what do you know?" But she said it was distracting because people were looking at it, trying to figure out what it was, especially if they could only see part of it. So, it's the same. And you do the same thing when we're meeting in person, right? We don't want all of these distractions around us because you want them to focus on you and what you're saying.
Absolutely. Yeah. And excellent point, because too busy background is distracting. And so our brain is following it. So keeping things simple is very important. Yeah. Yeah.
Well, Dr. Debra, what we're really talking about is someone's emotional intelligence, right? And how they deal with this. So what are ways that we can grow our emotional intelligence?
Well, there are quite a number of ways, but what I would really encourage people to do, and they can visit my website, relationships-at-work.com/3D formula, and click on that and go ahead and take the emotional intelligence assessment that I have there. It's free. They get immediate results, but this would be a good way of finding out, where are you? Standardized questions, and of course, self-response. But if you're at an 18 or lower, that definitely suggests developmental opportunities. And even if you got above 18, again, what's the lowest? And again, developmental opportunity. So at least that gives you some idea of, what do I need to work on? Is it self-awareness? Is it self-management? Is it other awareness or relationship management? And then, so that would be one thing I would do right there. And I use the communications assessment that follows it, step 2. I call it the spice game, because after all, it's spices that make food so wonderful, right? And that's what makes human beings so wonderful too, or not. But through the spice game, then it gives you an opportunity to, it's a list of characteristics that you choose that you feel are reflective of you. But and so, in important relationships that I would encourage, well, even if somebody hasn't taken an assessment, now that I know what I know about these 4 communication styles, and gets into our focal point, our what our underlying fear is, what our underlying need is, how do we tend to communicate in statements or questions. Once we begin to know and understand this, now we can one, not only have a clearer picture of ourselves, now we can use these as clues as to where other people are showing up. And so to me, it really enhances understanding of self and others. And then when they take the communication styles, I actually have a communication guide that shows that, okay, if I'm dealing with, a driver, or what I call the parsley, and I'm a ginger, or I'm a steady person, how should I approach that other person? So many versions of the DISC, as I mentioned earlier. And so, and then going on with the conflict management styles, there's a time and place for everything. There's not one conflict management style is not better than the other, and that's true for communication. But again, where do I tend to go? And then who am I dealing with who might have a different conflict management style? Maybe that's why we're having difficulty.
Your conflict styles are in conflict.
yeah, exactly. Well, and that's true for the communication styles too. I learned, and these kinds of assessments came not from my psychology background, but as I was starting my career as a mediator. I'm going, how can two really nice people be at such odds? My psychology training did not teach me that. And that's how I got into communication styles. And I do find that whether it's at home or work, there's two particular styles that tend to be in conflict. And that's often the root. And yet they're so busy blaming and shaming each other. They're not looking at behaviors. They're putting the whole person into the picture. So that's the other thing. As an emotionally intelligent person, I know I only know so much. I can't be right all the time. And yet too many people, yeah, I know. And yet too many people, do have that perspective that I'm right, and particularly as leaders. And
that's why I'm the leader.
Yeah. I have to have all the answers, and that's a lot of pressure. And the reality is, then, from an emotionally intelligent perspective, is that it's not realistic for me to have all the answers. I just need to know how to find out the answers.
Right.
And that's why you want a team of people that you can turn to who have expertises that may not be yours. And so that's the biggest thing from the leadership standpoint then. But it applies to people at all levels of the organization and families. Like I said in the beginning, I use my assessments in almost every situation, whether it's one-on-one, pre-mediation, group intervention, in the workplace. So building our emotional intelligence is key as a foundation.
I love it. I love it. Well, speaking of that, tell us again your website and what are the services that you provide?
Thank you very much. Yes. I actually had to design my name this way because the one without the hyphens was already taken, but I really wanted to look at relationships at work, and not just at work, but relationships in progress, know. So it's relationships at work.com.
Okay.
And so there are a couple of key areas of services that I provide. My passion is really about doing group interventions in the workplace. So I do both. It's a form of dispute resolution, going into working with the team, and working with the leader, the manager, working with the individual team members. And the team sizes can vary greatly depending upon the organization. And I take them through a series of one-on-one coaching as well as training, learning through resources. And so that's really where I have passion. With that, then mediation may show up if I've got a conflict between two particular people. And I've been working with a community college district in that realm over the last few months, and going into a county agency next week. I've been there before with some other things. They're having some problem in the auditing department. So yeah. And then I do speaking. In fact, I have a TEDx talk coming up on July 23rd.
Yay!
Yeah. And so I love just sharing the knowledge and passion and making a difference in people's lives. Again, it goes back to my upbringing, where I just saw so many people damaged and not living healthy lives, that really being able to turn them around. So again, mediation is one, training and coaching is another, speaking, and then I do have one-on-one clients as well.
I
do some
love
extra
it.
work. So
perfect. I love it. And you've got lots of resources on your website. So I encourage folks to go there. So again, it's relationships at work.com. And so please go there and find that. Well, Dr. Debra, this really has been so fascinating. And I would love to have you on again, because I think this is so important, because as we mentioned, it applies to everybody. We are all somehow in all of this, unless we live in a cave somewhere and never talk to anybody. And how fun is that? And so, whether, it doesn't matter what's going on, we're somehow part of this. And so we want to help resolve those conflicts, have better relationships, be more successful in our business and our personal lives. So I would love to have you on again. But until then, do you have any final thoughts that you want to leave everyone with?
Yes. Sometimes we, things have to get pretty bad sometimes before we are motivated or pushed to do something different. And so I like to share two quotes with you. First comes from Albert Einstein. In the middle of difficulty lies opportunity. And so sometimes things have to get pretty bad. And then my own phrase is that From moments of pain comes the momentum for gain. And so sometimes, and that's oftentimes when I get called in is that we just don't know what to do anymore. We need help. And that's okay, because we can't be specialists in everything we do. And, and I encourage all of our listeners out there, particularly our leaders and managers that can do something about this. Don't just chalk it off that, they just have different personalities. They just don't get along. I'm sorry. In today's work world, we have no place being at work if we're not getting along with people. And so step in earlier. There are 3 sources of conflict, and the earlier we can step in and identify the sources and start to turn things around, the easier it is to manage a conflict, and the less costly too.
I love it. Well, this has been so much fun. I am Deb Creer. I've been having a fascinating discussion with Dr. Debra Dupree of relationships at work. And until next time, everyone have a great day.
Tune in for our next program for even more trends, best practices, and techniques for how to make your business a success. The Business Power Hour, hosted by Deb Creer, is proud to be part of the C-Suite Network.